Welcome back to Capitol Square. Joining us now with analysis of Senate Bill 5 and Governor John Kasich, we welcome Joe Hallett from the Columbus Dispatch, Joe Ingles from Ohio Public Radio and Television, and Mark Niquette from Bloomberg News. Mark, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Joe, good to see you. My assessment, sitting down with the governor this week after the enormity of the protests that we saw, not just in Columbus, but literally all across the state of Ohio, is that he's comfortable driving the bus. He had the bus behind him, actually, in the interview, and he makes reference to that he's driving the bus. He's encouraging everybody to get in. But, I mean, right now, theoretically, he's driving over unions, and he's driving over union supporters with little empathy, at least at this point, seemingly. I mean, is this bus headed in a direction where it's good news at the end, or is there a sharp curve ahead? I mean, I guess that's the big question mark of exactly where is this bus headed, Joe?
Well, I don't think we know yet that it all will play out. I think it's just another lesson that elections have consequences. In 1983, when collective bargaining law was instituted, Democrats controlled the State House for 2 years. Now, the shoe is on the other foot, and Republicans have total control. We're not just seeing collective bargaining. We're seeing other frontal assaults on labor. We're seeing that the School Facilities Commission on Thursday got rid of a prevailing wage in construction projects. We're seeing House Bill 61 now, which would which would permit companies with a payroll of under 500,000 to give comp time rather than pay overtime. So we're seeing a business agenda playing out through the Republican control right now, and Kasich and his allies say this will translate into a stronger, healthier, more jobbed Ohio.
And you know what's interesting is Governor Kasich keeps talking about being bipartisan and how there needs to be give and take. But then you also hear all these comments from him, get on the bus or I'm running over you, asking teachers, telling them they better apologize to him, don't you think I'd apologize? There's constantly this adversarial tone to some of the things he says. And then he says, well, but we're all together, let's get together for the good of Ohio. It doesn't quite mesh with the groups that he represents, some of the groups he represents.
And Mark, it's kind of interesting. He's always quick to point out, look, that collective bargaining law in the state was approved on a straight party line vote back in the 80s. But then when you mention, well, you're going to turn around and do the exact same thing, he kind of brushes that off. But that's what's happening here, right?
Well, right, and obviously what's driving it all is the budget. The fact that we have, this $8 billion budget deficit, and it's not just Ohio, it's Wisconsin, it's all these other states where you're seeing these protests take place. And the argument is we need this collective bargaining change to give us the flexibilities to manage these budget cuts. But there is, as you say, an ideological component to it as well, and Republicans are in charge, and this is part of their agenda.
Do you find it, I just find it fascinating that the governor can argue that this is not at all political. I mean, the Republican Party and unions have been enemies forever. And when you look at Republicans now that are trying to chip away at unions' rights, collective bargaining, I mean, come on. I mean, is he serious about that?
Well, it's interesting how it plays in even to the national narrative. I mean, we have this big fight going on in Washington right now about spending and the deficit and the budget situation there, and you're kind of seeing the same kind of ideological push and pull between the Tea Parties or the conservative element that says we need to drastically scale this back, and the other side says, well, we can't scale back to the point of undercutting crucial things.
Well, they can argue it's not political, but the practical effect is political, because when you take all these actions against public employee unions, you are going to weaken them significantly. They are the benefactors for the Democratic Party, and when you weaken the public employee unions, you're going to weaken the Democratic Party. And it will be interesting to me to see where the Democratic Party now goes for funding in the short term if all these efforts succeed.
We're kind of ruling out, we're saying, oh, this is going to pass and it's going to stick. I have a feeling this is not going to stick.
But do unions
pass,
have the political strength? I mean, if this heads to a referendum, I mean, union membership has dropped down now, I think, to 14% the last I checked. I mean, is there enough strength? Can unions?
Look at every poll we've seen. Every poll we've seen has shown that people generally support the unions. And not only, look at the unions we're talking about. We're talking about teachers, firefighters, police officers. These are trusted individuals in our society. And, you know, a lot of times people will listen to the people who are closest to them versus politicians, versus the people who are, you know, there's a lot of distrust among business leaders when you go out in the general public right now. So, you know, who's to say that I think they do have a good chance if they go with a referendum or whatever. They should have a good chance. The polls are with them. You know, the type of people that are there that works for them. So,
but I think one thing we're seeing is the Republicans playing into some private sector resentment over public employees and the deals they have through union contracts. I was at an event in which Sherrod Brown listened to 6 public employees lament the inner collective bargaining and what it would mean. And there was a woman standing on the sideline. And when they finished, she said, well, wait a minute. You know, I work in the nonprofit sector. I have not had a pay raise in more than 5 years. I have no retirement plan. I have no health care. You have all of that, you know. So I think that's out there, and I think that they've tapped into that.
And Mark, there is a reality. This could work. Some of these changes could result in a better economy for the state of Ohio. I mean, we have a natural cynical tendency because we've covered this on a day-to-day basis. But, I mean, you put yourself 2 or 3 years out, and maybe there is a method to this.
Well, and that's why I think you're seeing the argument being made so consistently, not only in Ohio, but in other states, that what this is about is giving local governments and state governments the flexibility they need to manage their budgets and accomplish the things they want to do.
All right. Welcome back to Capitol Square. Mark Niquette, Joe Ingles, Joe Hallett rejoin me now for this conversation of Governor John Kasich and SB 5. I mean, Joe, what else is left as part of this reform plan? I mean, we could see efforts to privatize the turnpike, ramp up private schools, maybe sell off some state property. I mean, when the governor kept emphasizing, hey, this is just the first part, I mean, what else is coming?
Well, we'll find out probably on March 15th when he unveils his budget, which will be a red letter day in Ohio history. I mean, we are going to see a budget unlike any we've ever seen before, at least in my experience. And I think we will see proposals to privatize. We'll see department mergers, service sharing, all sorts of things, I think, to save some money and maybe get more efficiencies. I wanted to make a point. We saw Governor Strickland insert himself in these protests the other day, and I'm thinking, in a very short time, the Republicans and Governor Kasich have almost wiped out any evidence that he was governor. They've eliminated his legacy, you know, high-speed rail, prevailing wage for school facilities commissions,
Calamity
collective
days.
bargaining, calamity days, and I keep thinking, how does he feel about all this?
Well, he certainly arrived to a large ovation with the union supporters of the state. It was almost deafening when he walked in the room at that protest on last Tuesday, Joe.
Yeah, Ted Strickland was a rock star when he walked into that atrium. There was no doubt about it. And, you know, one thing we got to remember here is when Governor Kasich was elected, he wasn't elected by a large margin. And we didn't have a high turnout election. There were a lot of people who were generally frustrated. And I think that's the way a lot of people feel. They're frustrated. And a lot of that frustration was vented against Ted Strickland because he was in charge, maybe not against Ted Strickland because they didn't like him or they didn't like his policies. It's just, you're in charge, it's not working, let's give someone else a chance.
On the other hand, what was it that Rahm Emanuel said, a Democrat, never let a good crisis go to waste? So we'll see.
I mean, it's almost Strickland is responding, Joe, to the point that you made by reemerging. I mean, we're only, 2 months past the inauguration of John Kasich, and instead of kind of going away as former leaders do, I mean, he has reemerged, certainly as a recognizable leader of the union movement in all of this.
Well, and it's almost by necessity because beyond Sherrod Brown, the U.S. Senator, the Democrats have no recognizable figurehead to lead them. So by default, I think that's fallen to Governor Strickland.
Joe, just very quickly, we just have less than a minute left, but your story that you worked on Thursday, the Senate President Tom Niehaus, a Republican, had suggested that a union member had, well, you tell the story. What was the end resolution on that?
The Senate President Tom Niehaus had suggested that a union member might have defecated in the building, said there was evidence of that, said there was evidence of graffiti in the building. And, you know, that angers the teachers, the firefighters, the people who were there, because they're not exactly the type of people that you'd think of, you know, doing that kind of thing. So when we went to find out exactly what happened, it turns out that the defecation was out in a stairwell by the street, by the bus stop. And that wouldn't be an extraordinary occurrence, because anyone who's been in those stairwells knows that that wouldn't be out of the ordinary.
So charges made that perhaps were not backed up by fact.
Right, and the graffiti was in chalk, so it wiped right off. So.
Well, good. We have that solved then. Very good. Mark Niquette, Joe Ingles, Joe Hallett, as always, my friends, good to see you. And thanks for tuning in to Capitol Square this week. Remember, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. If it's Ohio politics, it's Capitol Square. Take care, everybody.